In the heat of June 2012, life in a common Singaporean neighborhood seemed ordinary enough. Kids played at the void decks, while families carried out their daily routines without a second thought. But inside one home, things were about to change. A sister, curious about her 11-year-old brother's phone, stumbled upon something that made her heart race. Text messages from an individual identified as Yap Weng Wah, and the content of these messages raised suspicions. It was entirely inappropriate for an 11-year-old. She asked her brother about it, and what she learned turned their world upside down. It turned out Yap was a stranger he'd met online, someone who was 18 years older, and someone who'd done bad things to him. Shocked and scared, she knew she had to do something. Immediately, they approached the authorities and filed a report. Little did they realize, their brave step towards seeking help would set off a chain of events that would shock the entire nation. 3 months following the filing of the police report, law enforcement officers raided Yap Weng Wah's rented apartment, and their discovery during this operation plunged Yap into infamy, cementing his status as one of the most notorious child predators Singapore has ever seen. Inside Yap's apartment, investigators uncovered a disturbing cache of evidence, a collection of over 2,000 obscene videos stored on his laptop. These recordings depicted extremely indecent interactions between Yap and his young victims, all of which were male. What made the situation even more alarming was his careful organization of these videos, each meticulously catalogued with the names, ages, and the year that he met them. As the details of Yap's crimes came to light, it was obvious that his crimes on the 11-year-old boy was just the tip of the iceberg, and no one could have foreseen the extent of depravity that would grip the nation. You're listening to Heinous, an Asian true crime podcast, brought to you by One Up Media. This episode may contain sensitive details and graphic imagery. Listener discretion is advised. Born in 1983 in Ipoh, Malaysia, Yap Weng Wah entered the world as the eldest of 3 siblings, with a brother and a sister to share his childhood with. However, his upbringing was far from conventional. At the tender age of 8, Yap's family dynamics shifted dramatically when his father departed for New Zealand, leaving his mother to shoulder the responsibility of raising the children alone. Left behind in Malaysia, Yap's mother found herself thrust into the daunting role of single parenthood. The challenges she faced were immense, particularly in the context of 1990s Ipoh, where economic opportunities were limited and social support systems were scarce. Financial hardships often loomed over the household, casting a shadow over their day-to-day lives. Growing up in a single-parent household presented its challenges for young Yap. Without the guidance of a father figure, he navigated the complexities of adolescence under the sole care of his devoted mother. This is a frequent observation among many criminals. A lack of guidance and support during childhood can render an individual exceptionally susceptible to manipulation and exploitation. And that's precisely what happened during his time in primary school at the age of 12. In primary school, Yap encountered a distressing situation when his male mathematics teacher began engaging in inappropriate acts with him. According to reports, his teacher would sexually abuse him at least once or twice a week, and this pattern persisted for a period of 9 months until he completed his schooling. At just 12 years old, Yap likely felt isolated and powerless in the face of the teacher's actions, unsure of how to process the trauma he was experiencing. It is assumed that Yap never disclosed the incidents that occurred during his primary school years and continued his education without addressing the trauma. Following his academic journey, he pursued a career path as a quality assurance engineer. In 2009, he was employed at ASM Technology in Singapore, an electronics manufacturing company, where he was described to have demonstrated dedication and professionalism in his work. His colleagues call him Travis at work, and he was characterized as a reserved individual who preferred to keep to himself, seldom engaging in extensive conversations. However, none of them could have imagined the darkness that Travis was hiding beneath his exterior. Despite his outwardly calm and composed nature, Yap Weng Wah concealed a disturbing secret. In 2009, during a period when social media platforms were still relatively novel concepts, Facebook was rapidly gaining traction, especially among the younger generation, who were quick to embrace its features and connectivity. Yap Weng Wah was part of this trend, having not just one but several Facebook accounts, each under a different name and age. However, these multiple accounts weren't just for harmless fun. Yap Weng Wah had a disturbing agenda behind them. He used these accounts to scour the internet for young boys who lived near his rental apartment or attended schools nearby. One of the accounts he made embodied the persona of an 18-year-old polytechnic student operating under the aliases Y Loon or Loon. It was pretty clear that he had carefully devised this facade. But what was he trying to do? Initially, Yap embarked on a relentless spree of sending friend requests on Facebook, carefully selecting his targets rather than indiscriminately reaching out to just anyone. His criteria were clear. The individuals he sought were preferably young boys aged between 11 to 15, and he preferred them to be situated near his residence along New Upper Changi Road. Upon establishing contact with his selected victims, Yap would initiate communication by sending them a message, introducing himself as an older brother figure or mentor. But the question is, why would these young boys respond to Yap's messages or accept his Facebook friend request? Well, there are several reasons why they may find themselves compelled to interact with his messages. Apart from the fact that the boys interacting with him were unaware of his true age, many adolescents in this age bracket frequently seek validation and acceptance from older peers or role models as they navigate the complexities of growing up. You see, Yap's portrayal of himself as an older, more experienced individual could be seen as appealing and authoritative, fostering a sense of admiration and trust among impressionable youths. Additionally, teenagers may be curious about the experiences and perspectives of older individuals, leading them to engage in conversations with someone like Yap. They may also be seeking guidance or simply looking for someone to talk to who seems understanding and approachable. However, the young boys he conversed with remained unaware that his intentions were anything but innocent. For weeks or even months on end, Yap engaged in prolonged online conversations with his victims, frequently juggling multiple conversations simultaneously. These discussions encompassed a wide array of subjects, including hobbies, movies, sports, and computer games, creating an illusion of harmless camaraderie. Yet, concealed within these seemingly innocuous exchanges, Yap had always managed to steer the conversation towards a more sensitive topic, particularly sex. As Yap and his potential victims forged deeper connections through their online interactions, he would gradually arrange physical meetings under the guise of offering gifts, playing computer games, or providing tips on bodybuilding. It was during these face-to-face encounters that the horror unfolded, revealing the true nature of Yap's intentions. Once Yap had effectively persuaded a boy he had been talking with on Facebook to meet him in person, he would provide them with an address and assert that the meeting was solely for the sake of friendship. Under this pretense, Yap would manipulate the trust he had built online and lure them into a trap of deceit and manipulation. According to reports, when Yap met his victims in person, he would coerce them into consenting to various nefarious acts. These acts often included oral sex, sodomy, and molestation. It occurred in a range of locations, spanning from public restrooms within bustling shopping malls to the perceived safety of his own residence. Sometimes, Yap took advantage of his unsuspecting victims by booking hotel rooms, using them as a setting to entice and ensnare the boys into his web of deception. In all of these meetups, his heinous deeds were conducted even when his victims were reluctant. Many reports state that his victims said no, cried, or insisted that they were not interested. Most disturbingly, he would consistently bring his phone or camera to every encounter, using it to record each interaction. Over the period from November 2009 to June 2012, Yap Weng Wah executed his nefarious scheme, victimizing a total of 30 boys. To put this into perspective, it equates to almost one victim per month over the course of 3 years. His MO remained consistent throughout. He would initiate contact with a new boy on Facebook, engaging in conversations over a period to establish a facade of trust. Once this trust was secured, he would arrange a face-to-face meeting, during which he would subject his victims to heinous acts of sexual abuse. Each occurrence involved a minor, and almost all of them were recorded on video. Persistently engaging in these acts over 3 years raises an alarming question. Why did none of his victims say anything about it? The answer, however, is far from straightforward. There are many reasons why victims of child sexual abuse don't speak up on it, at least in a timely manner. Firstly, many young boys of that age may not recognize sexual abuse due to a lack of comprehensive sex education. Without understanding the concept of sex and perverted behavior from adults, they may not realize that they are being exploited. Additionally, some experts suggest that children can become confused if they experience physical pleasure or emotional intimacy during the abuse, further complicating their ability to recognize and report the abuse. Furthermore, offenders commonly employ manipulation tactics to coerce their victims into silence. They may convince the child that they won't be believed or that they are somehow responsible for the abuse and will be punished for it. These threats can feel very real to children of that age, especially considering the power dynamic the offender holds over them. In the case of Yap Weng Wah, many details of his crimes were never publicly disclosed, making it difficult to ascertain why his victims did not speak up immediately. In the majority of cases involving the 30 victims, it's apparent that many exhibited reluctance and even cried when subjected to Yap's disturbing actions. However, what remains uncertain is whether Yap resorted to threats to ensure their silence. It is plausible that Yap employed intimidation tactics, coercing his victims into remaining silent by instilling fear and threatening repercussions if they were to speak out against him. Alternatively, it's conceivable that victims feared the potential consequences of Yap's videotaping of the incidents, worrying that he would exploit the footage as blackmail against them. In early 2010, Yap Weng Wah found himself in the midst of his criminal activities, preparing to encounter another victim. This time, it was a 13-year-old boy who had just finished his day at school. Through their messages on Facebook, the two had arranged to meet at the Hougang swimming complex. While the exact purpose of their meeting remains unclear, it is believed that Yap had planned to present the boy with a gift. When the boy arrived, clad in his school uniform, Yap met him with a smile and promptly directed him to follow him to the restroom. The boy wouldn't know it, but Yap had brought along his camera and was ready to film the unfolding events with sinister intent. Sometime in early September 2012, the Singapore police received a report from a young woman that her 11-year-old brother had been receiving highly inappropriate messages from a man named Yap Weng Wah. Shortly thereafter, another report surfaced, alleging that 29-year-old Yap had engaged in inappropriate behavior with a young boy. Immediately, officers descended upon his residence in Yishun and took him into custody. Inside the interrogation room, the air was tense. Yap Weng Wah, had a boyish look on him. Even though he was reaching his 30s, he still had somewhat of a baby face. But apart from that, nothing else really stood out. However, the seriousness of the situation was unmistakable. Though he appeared just like any other ordinary adult, the nature of his actions was far from ordinary. The day that he was arrested, and under pressure from the police, Yap confessed to having sex with a total of 3 underage boys. According to the Singapore Penal Code, any person who engages in sexual intercourse with a minor under the age of 16 are subject to severe penalties. The law stipulates that such offenders may face imprisonment for up to 10 years, a fine, or both. However, the consequences escalate significantly if the minor is below the age of 14. In such cases, the perpetrator may be sentenced to imprisonment for up to 20 years, in addition to being liable for a fine or caning. In the case of Yap Weng Wah, should he be found guilty of the offenses he confessed to regarding the 3 boys, he would most likely face a substantial prison sentence. However, what transpired next would catapult the case into the forefront of every local newspaper's headlines. Upon investigating further, they discovered a disturbing truth. Yap had not been truthful about the extent of his actions. It wasn't just 3 boys, it was at least 10 times more. On September 8, 2012, Yap Weng Wah faced the legal system head-on as he was formally brought before the court to answer to a staggering 76 charges. Each and every one of these charges stemmed from crimes perpetrated against teenage boys aged between 11 and 15 in Singapore. Following this, he was remanded for investigations. Given the staggering revelation of over 2,000 inappropriate videos found within his laptop, there was looming speculation over what other secrets he might be hiding. Given the gravity of Yap's crimes, an anticipated surge of media coverage on the case was expected, but that was not the case, because this was a deliberate strategy to protect the ongoing investigation. At this stage of the investigation, revealing Yap's arrest prematurely could have adverse effects. Any potential victims who had not yet stepped forward might be overwhelmed by media scrutiny and feelings of shame, leading to their reluctance to come forward or to the compromise of vital leads. Therefore, as shocking as his crimes were, confidentiality was important. It was revealed that during his time working in Singapore, Yap, then 26 years old, began his predatory spree from November 2009 until June 2012, just 3 months before his arrest. His MO involved using social media platforms like Facebook to seek out young boys residing or attending schools near his home. While the exact reason for selecting victims in close proximity to his residence is not explicitly stated, it is reasonable to infer that the closer his victims were, the more convenient it would be for him to take advantage of them. Yap would create several fictitious identities on Facebook, frequently adopting the name Wai Loon and portraying himself as an 18-year-old polytechnic student based in Singapore. Sometimes, he would lie that he was a foreign student from Indonesia, deceiving his victims by stating he was seeking friends due to being new in the area. Since many of his victims were young and vulnerable, they would accept his friend requests and reply to his messages. During his online exchanges with his victims, he would portray himself as an older brother figure or mentor, leveraging this facade to cultivate trust over long periods of time, often spanning weeks or even months. To him, each accepted friend request meant a step closer to ensnaring a new victim, yet he understood the need to be subtle in his interactions. Yap Weng Wah knew that getting his victims to meet him would require more than just a swift approach. He needed to create a bond with his victims. Consequently, he invested considerable time delving into topics of interest shared with his victims, such as their hobbies, their favorite movies, sports, and video games. Once he sensed that the boys were comfortable with him, he would gradually integrate discussions about more sensitive topics, such as sex. This calculated approach allowed him to establish a rapport with his victims, while subtly laying the groundwork for his predatory intentions. According to sources, Yap Weng Wah's criminal charge sheet was 23 pages long and contained 76 charges made against him. 7 of them involved 11-year-olds, 13 of them involved 12-year-olds, and the last 4 involved 15-year-old boys. These were details that were not revealed to the public at the time and wouldn't come to light for another 3 years at least. When the full report of his crimes were eventually made public, it revealed that Yap had targeted a total of 31 boys, with only one managing to avoid becoming a victim. 51 of his charges were related to sexual penetration of a minor below 14 years old, while 24 others were for minors below 16. The last remaining charge involved him soliciting a 12-year-old to record himself performing indecent acts and sending the video over to him. Of the 76 criminal acts committed, there were several that stood out as particularly egregious ones. On February 4, 2010, Yap had arranged to meet with a 13-year-old boy at a public swimming complex in Hougang. The purpose of this meeting was not disclosed publicly, but it is believed that the boy lived nearby and was heading home from school at the time. At the swimming complex, Yap accompanied the boy to the changing room and entered a cubicle with him. The boy was then instructed to remove his school uniform, and when he did, Yap sodomized him and filmed the act. On another occasion, in March 2010, Yap had arranged a meeting with a 15-year-old boy at a hotel in Geylang. Upon the boy's arrival, he attempted to undress and kiss him, but the boy refused. Despite his protests, Yap eventually forced himself on the boy and performed oral sex on him. In late September 2011, Yap met a 14-year-old boy, and this time, forced him to perform oral sex while they were inside a toilet cubicle at the Tampines Stadium. And finally, there was another instance, the date of which remains unspecified, where Yap met and talked with another boy for several months on Facebook before they met in person at a shopping mall. He had invited the boy to the mall for lunch and a visit to the arcade, but eventually took him back to his rented room to watch cartoons while his landlord was in the house. On that day, Yap removed the boy's clothes and sexually assaulted him. However, he later assured the young boy that it wouldn't happen again, and they continued to maintain their friendship. Despite this, they would continue to meet on several occasions, and each time, Yap would assault him again, either before or after taking the boy for a movie or for lunch. While preying on his victims in Singapore, the police found that Yap had also targeted other teenage boys back in Malaysia. During his annual visits back to his hometown in Ipoh, Yap was noted to have sexually assaulted another 14 boys, all under the age of 16. He also filmed these acts, just like his 31 victims in Singapore. Yap confessed to these offenses when he was arrested in September 2012, but since these crimes were committed outside of Singapore, he was not handed a single charge related to these 14 boys. On January 16, 2015, 2 years and 4 months following his arrest, 31-year-old Yap Weng Wah faced trial in the High Court of Singapore. When the trial began, he pleaded guilty to 12 counts of sexual penetration with a minor and agreed to have an additional 64 charges considered during his sentencing. During the court proceedings, Dr. Saluja, a psychiatrist from the Institute of Mental Health, provided a diagnosis report indicating that Yap was diagnosed with hebephilia, which means that Yap had a sexual preference for children aged between 11 and 14 years old. In his subsequent report, he also stated that although it was challenging to definitively diagnose Yap with a pedophilic disorder or pedophilia, his pursuit of pubescent boys for sexual satisfaction did exhibit a deviant pattern of sexual behaviors, a pattern that is extremely common among many other high-risk sex offenders. During the trial proceedings, the prosecution pushed for a sentence of at least 30 years imprisonment and the maximum legal punishment of 24 strokes of the cane for Yap, labeling him as a clear and present danger to society. They argued that Yap's offenses exhibited a high degree of premeditation, and by exploiting the internet, he deliberately targeted a vulnerable group of victims, engaging in unprotected sex with his victims in all instances. On the other hand, Yap's lawyer requested a sentence of no more than 20 years of imprisonment. He argued that during his client's period of remand, Yap had expressed a genuine desire for reform and rehabilitation. Therefore, he believed Yap deserved a second chance, or at the very least, some degree of leniency. It took 3 years from Yap's arrest to the point where his crimes were exposed in newspapers and the media, and reportedly, Yap's family faced significant challenges following his arrest. His sister was forced to abandon her university studies in order to get a job to support the family, while his brother had to resign from his job to care for their mother at home. Additionally, every single week, his family had to endure a 6-hour journey from Ipoh to Singapore to visit him in prison, where he was being held on remand pending trial. During his mitigation in court, Yap Weng Wah broke down in tears and expressed remorse and shame for his actions. He apologized to his family, who continued to offer their support despite their shock at his actions. He also apologized to all the victims. He blamed his childhood experiences of rape during primary school and fear of rejection from a female classmate in secondary school as factors that contributed to shaping his current behavior. However, despite his tearful pleas, there was little that could convince the court that he deserved a light sentence. On March 20th, 2015, 2 months following his conviction by the High Court, 31-year-old Yap Weng Wah was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment and 24 strokes of the cane. The sentence would be backdated to the 8th of September 2012, the date of his remand. Upon completing the full 30-year term, he would be released in the year 2042. At the time, Yap's case had captured widespread attention in Singapore and stunned the nation upon its disclosure. Despite being in his early 30s, he had an innocent, boyish look on him, which made it difficult for many to connect his looks with the heinous nature of his crimes. After news of his crimes came to light, public advisories, including those issued by the government, emphasized the need for increased awareness among young people and parents regarding online risks. These efforts were aimed at preventing similar crimes from occurring in the future. In 2015, Yap Weng Wah was listed among the top 10 individuals who captured nationwide attention, and his case is considered to be one of the top 25 most heinous crimes that have shaken Singapore since 1965. Heinous, an Asian true crime podcast, is brought to you by One-Up Media. This episode was produced and written by Guangjin, edited by Alex, narrated by Jason, audio experience by Ethan Sam, additional engineering by Ashley from One-Up Media. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next one.